Dr. Theo Caldwell leaned against the console of his med shuttle, gazing at the holographic message flickering in front of him. The words were formal, their weight undeniable. Urgent. Request for immediate assistance. The Queen of Zephyrian seeks aid for her guardian beast Varnix. No other healers have succeeded. Will you accept? Theo's eyes narrowed at the name, Varnix. Even on distant worlds, the dragon's legend had reached his ears. A creature of unparalleled ferocity, with a body as armored as a tank and venom that could melt steel. Stories abounded of healers and warriors alike who'd tried to approach it, only to meet grisly ends. He drummed his fingers on the console. The warnings from colleagues echoed in his mind. No one can handle that beast. It's suicide. But Theo wasn't one to shy away from the impossible. His career had been built on healing the unhealable, saving creatures others abandoned to their fates. With a grim smile, he tapped the communicator. This is Dr. Caldwell. Tell the Queen I'm on my way. The journey to Zephyrian was fraught with tension. As Theo's shuttle entered the planet's atmosphere, the view was breathtaking. A sprawling expanse of volcanic peaks and lush, glowing jungles stretched beneath a crimson sky. But the beauty was marred by the sight of the Queen's fortress, its towering spires wrapped in smoke and shadow, as though the land itself recoiled from the beast it housed. When Theo disembarked, he was met by a squad of royal guards. Their armor gleamed in the dim light, but their expressions were grim. One stepped forward, his voice low. You're braver than the others, Doctor. Or perhaps just foolish. Theo smirked. Maybe both. Take me to Varnix. The guards led him through the fortress's labyrinthine corridors, the air growing heavier with each step. The distant roars of the dragon reverberated through the walls, a sound so powerful it made Theo's chest tighten. At last, they reached a massive set of reinforced doors, carved with ancient runes. The lead guard hesitated, glancing at Theo. This is your last chance to back out. Theo stepped forward without a word, his med kit slung over his shoulder. The doors groaned open, and he entered the dragon's den. The chamber was cavernous, lit by streams of molten rock flowing through the walls like glowing veins. The heat was oppressive, making Theo's skin prickle. At the center of the room, bound by chains thicker than tree trunks, lay Varnix. The dragon was a breathtaking mix of beauty and terror. Its massive body was covered in iridescent scales that shimmered like oil slicks, shifting between hues of black, green, and violet. Spines lined its back, each tipped with venomous barbs, and its wings were tattered yet majestic, resembling storm clouds unfurling in the dim light. Its glowing yellow eyes locked onto Theo as he entered, a low growl rumbling deep in its throat. Theo's instincts screamed at him to keep his distance, but he forced himself to step closer. You're as impressive as they say, he murmured, his voice calm but steady. Let's see what's going on. The dragon shifted, its chains clinking ominously. Theo's gaze fell on a jagged wound along its side, where the scales were blackened and oozing a dark, viscous fluid. The flesh around it was swollen, the infection spreading dangerously close to its vital organs. Poisoned weapons, Theo muttered under his breath, activating his medical scanner. The dragon growled again, louder this time, its glowing eyes narrowing. Easy, Theo said, holding his hands up. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. He kept his movements slow as he retrieved a syringe filled with a potent antibiotic mixture. The guards watching from the doorway shifted uneasily, their hands on their weapons. You can shoot me if you want, Theo said without looking back at them. But if you spook him, you'll regret it. With the syringe in hand, Theo edged closer to the dragon. Varnix growled, its massive body tensing, but it didn't strike. Theo knelt, carefully injecting the antibiotic near the wound. There, he said softly, stepping back. That should take the edge off. The dragon's growl softened into a low rumble, its luminous eyes still fixed on Theo. He took another step back, his heart pounding but his voice steady. I'll be back tomorrow. We've got a lot of work to do, you and me. As the doors closed behind him, Theo let out a shaky breath. The guards stared at him in stunned silence. You're insane, one muttered. Maybe, Theo replied. But I'm not wrong. The following morning, Theo stood before the massive doors to Varnix's chamber, his medkit heavier than usual. The fortress was unusually quiet, the guards from the previous night still whispering about his survival. Even the Queen had sent a message, brief but clear. Proceed carefully. You're our last hope. Theo stepped inside the chamber, greeted by the now familiar oppressive heat and the faint, metallic scent of the dragon's wound. Varnick stirred, his glowing yellow eyes snapping open to focus on the human who dared to return. "Morning, big guy," Theo said, setting his kit on the stone floor. "How are we feeling today?" Varnick's rumbled low, the sound reverberating through the chamber. Theo approached slowly, noting the faint improvement in the wound, less swelling, less oozing. The antibiotics were working, but the infection wasn't entirely gone. Theo would need to take more drastic measures. He crouched beside the dragon, his hands steady as he prepared another syringe. "This might sting a bit," he murmured, injecting the solution near the wound. Varnick flinched but didn't lash out, his spines rattling faintly as he let out a growl. "That's it," Theo said softly. "You're tougher than most, aren't you?" The dragon's gaze remained fixed on him, a mix of curiosity and caution in its glowing eyes. Theo decided to push his luck. Retrieving a specialized scanner, he edged closer to the wound, his fingers brushing against the edge of Varnick's iridescent scales. The material was cool and smooth, but the damaged area radiated heat. "You've been through hell," Theo muttered, focusing on the scanner's readings. "Poisoned weapons, probably tipped with something nasty to bring you down." "But you didn't go down, did you? That says a lot." Varnick huffed, a burst of hot air ruffling Theo's hair. The human chuckled, glancing up at the dragon. "Is that agreement? I'll take it." As Theo worked, he spoke to Varnick, recounting stories of other creatures he'd treated, some as massive as mountain trolls, others small and venomous like the ice spiders of Calidus IV. Varnick listened, or at least didn't interrupt, his rumbling breaths creating a rhythm in the quiet chamber. After an hour, Theo packed up his tools and stepped back. "That's enough for today," he said, meeting the dragon's gaze. "We're making progress, but it's going to take time." As he turned to leave, Varnick let out a sound, soft, almost inquisitive. Theo paused, glancing back. "You don't want me to go, do you?" The dragon tilted its massive head, a gesture that felt almost too intelligent. Theo smiled. "I'll be back tomorrow, big guy. Promise." By the third day, Theo had settled into a routine with Varnick, his presence a fixture in the dragon's life. But as he prepared for his next session, a royal messenger intercepted him. "The Queen requests your presence in the throne room," the messenger said, bowing slightly. Theo frowned but followed, his medkit slung over his shoulder. The throne room was grand and imposing, its high ceilings adorned with carvings of dragons in flight. The Queen sat on her elevated throne, her piercing gaze fixed on him. "Dr. Caldwell," she began, her voice resonant, "your work with Varnick has been impressive, but healing his body is only part of the task. His spirit must also be tested." Theo tilted his head. "What exactly do you mean, Your Majesty?" The Queen gestured, and Vazrek, her ever-skeptical advisor, stepped forward. "We propose a trial," Vazrek said. "Release Varnick from his chains and observe whether he remains loyal or if he reverts to the feral instincts that make him so dangerous." Theo's stomach twisted. "He's not ready for that. He's still recovering." Vazrek smirked. "Then perhaps he isn't as loyal as you claim." Theo's jaw tightened. "It's not about loyalty, it's about trust. If you force him too soon, you'll undo everything we've worked for." The Queen raised a hand, silencing Vazrek. "You believe in him, Doctor. Enough to risk your life?" Theo met her gaze. "Yes," the Queen nodded. "Then proceed. But know this, if he fails, I cannot guarantee your safety." Back in the chamber, Theo stood before the now deactivated energy chains. Varnick stretched his massive wings, the sound like thunder rolling through the room. The dragon's glowing eyes flicked to Theo, then to the guards standing nervously near the door. "Okay, big guy," Theo said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "This is a test. They think you're going to go wild. Let's prove them wrong." He stepped closer, placing a hand on Varnick's flank. The dragon rumbled softly, the sound deep and calming. Slowly, Theo led Varnick out of the chamber and into the fortress courtyard, the guards trailing at a cautious distance. The courtyard was bathed in the orange glow of Zephyrian's setting sun. The Queen and her court watched from the balcony above, their expressions a mix of awe and apprehension. Vazrek stood at her side, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Varnick paused in the center of the courtyard, his wings unfurling slightly. The crowd tensed, but Theo remained calm. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're free, but you're still here. That's what matters." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the courtyard as a panicked guard dropped his weapon. Varnix's head snapped toward the sound, his spines flaring. The crowd gasped, and several guards raised their weapons. "Don't!" Theo shouted, stepping in front of the dragon. "He's just startled." Varnix growled, his body tense, but Theo reached out, placing both hands on the dragon's snout. "It's okay," he said softly. "No one's gonna hurt you." The dragon's growl subsided, his spines lowering. Theo let out a slow breath, glancing up at the queen. "He's not a monster," he said firmly. "He's just trying to figure out if he can trust us." The queen nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. Vazrek, however, looked unimpressed. Theo turned back to Varnix, scratching behind the dragon's horns. "You did good, big guy," he said, smiling. "Let's get you back inside." As they returned to the chamber, Theo felt a surge of pride. Varnix had passed the test, not just of loyalty, but of trust. And for the first time, Theo felt certain that they could overcome anything together. The next day, Theo entered Varnix's chamber with a renewed sense of determination. The trial in the courtyard had proven the dragon's capacity for trust, but it had also exposed how fragile that trust still was. He had seen the fear in Varnix's eyes, fear that the world might never see him as anything other than a weapon. Theo knelt beside the dragon, who lifted his massive head, his glowing yellow eyes fixed on the human. "You're stronger than they think," Theo said, his voice calm and reassuring. "But we're going to have to show them, aren't we?" Varnix rumbled softly, the sound vibrating through the chamber. Theo pulled out his scanner, checking the dragon's vitals and inspecting the wound. It had almost fully healed, the infection gone and the surrounding scales beginning to regenerate. Still, Varnix's body bore the scars of countless battles, each one a testament to his resilience, but also a reminder of the burdens he carried. Theo paused, his hand resting on the dragon's flank. "They've kept you in chains for too long," he murmured. "Let's see what you can do without them." He called for the guards, instructing them to remove the remaining restraints from Varnix's wings and legs. The guards hesitated, their fear palpable, but Theo's unwavering confidence pushed them to comply. The heavy chains clattered to the ground, and Varnix stretched his wings to their full, majestic span, their edges brushing the chamber walls. The dragon let out a powerful roar, shaking the room. The guards stumbled back, their weapons raised instinctively, but Theo stood firm. "Easy, big guy," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "You're free now. Let's use that freedom wisely." Varnix lowered his head, his glowing eyes meeting Theo's. The human felt a surge of connection, a silent understanding passing between them. This was no longer a creature bound by fear and pain. This was a being reclaiming his strength and his dignity. That afternoon, Theo led Varnix to the training grounds, a sprawling open area within the fortress walls. The queen watched from her balcony, surrounded by her advisors, including the ever-skeptical Vazrek. "This is a risk," Vazrek muttered. "If the dragon lashes out, it could destroy half the fortress." The queen remained silent, her sharp eyes fixed on the scene below. Theo stood beside Varnix, his hand resting on the dragon's leg. "All right, big guy," he said. "Let's show them what you've got." He motioned for a series of targets to be set up, massive stone structures designed to test Varnix's precision and power. At Theo's signal, Varnix unleashed a torrent of flame, the fire roaring like a living thing as it consumed the first target. The stone melted, leaving behind a pool of molten rock. The queen's court gasped, but Theo remained focused. "Good start," he said. "Now let's see some finesse." Varnix reared back, his wings unfurling as he took to the air. The massive beast moved with surprising agility, circling the training grounds before diving toward another target. This time, he struck with his claws, shattering the stone into dust. By the time the demonstration ended, Varnix had destroyed every target with a mix of fire, force, and precision. The guards stared in stunned silence, and even Vazrek looked impressed, though he quickly masked it with a scowl. Theo patted the dragon's flank. "You're more than just a weapon," he said softly. "You're a force of nature." That evening, Theo was in his quarters, reviewing data on Varnix's progress, when the alarms blared. His communicator crackled to life, the voice of a panicked guard cutting through the noise. "Dr. Caldwell, we're under attack. The rebels have breached the outer walls." Theo's heart sank. The rebels had been a growing threat, their attempts to destabilize the Queen's rule becoming more frequent. But an assault on the fortress itself was unprecedented. Grabbing his med kit, Theo ran toward the commotion, meeting a squad of guards in the main hall. "Where's the Queen?" he demanded. "She's in the throne room," one guard replied. "But the rebels are targeting the dragon's chamber. They think killing Varnix will break our morale." Theo felt a surge of anger. They have no idea what they're up against. He sprinted to Varnix's chamber, finding the dragon already on high alert. The sound of explosions and shouting echoed through the walls, and the air was thick with tension. Varnix growled, his spines rattling as he shifted his massive body. "It's time to fight," Theo said, meeting the dragon's glowing eyes. "They're coming for you, but we're not going to let them win." As if understanding his words, Varnix roared, the sound shaking the fortress. Theo opened the chamber doors, leading the dragon into the courtyard, where the rebels were pouring in through a breached gate. The sight of Varnix sent a wave of panic through the attackers. Some froze in place, their weapons trembling in their hands. Others fired recklessly, their plasma bolts deflecting harmlessly off the dragon's iridescent scales. "Let's go, big guy," Theo said, motioning forward. "Show them what happens when they mess with you." Varnix charged, his claws raking through the ground as he unleashed a torrent of flame. The rebels scattered, their formation breaking under the dragon's onslaught. Theo moved with him, using his rifle to pick off attackers trying to flank the beast. One rebel, braver than the rest, aimed a high-powered weapon at Varnix's exposed flank. Theo spotted him just in time. "Varnix, dodge!" he shouted. The dragon shifted with surprising agility, the shot missing by inches. Theo fired back, taking down the attacker before he could reload. "You've got to be quicker than that," he muttered, glancing at Varnix. "But nice save." The battle raged on, but the tide quickly turned in their favor. By the time reinforcements arrived, the rebels were retreating, their forces decimated by the combined efforts of Varnix and the Queen's defenders. As the smoke cleared, Theo stood beside Varnix in the courtyard, both of them covered in soot and ash. The Queen descended from her balcony, her expression unreadable as she approached. "You have done more than heal him, Dr. Caldwell," she said, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "You have awakened his true strength." Theo smiled, resting a hand on the dragon's flank. He always had it, he just needed someone to believe in him. Varnix rumbled softly, lowering his massive head until it rested beside Theo. The Queen regarded the scene for a moment before turning to her court. "Let it be known that Varnix is not a weapon, but a guardian of Zephyrian, and Dr. Caldwell is his partner in that cause." Theo felt a surge of pride as he looked up at the dragon. Together, they had faced impossible odds and won. But he knew their journey was far from over. This was just the beginning. The fortress was still buzzing with the aftermath of the rebel attack, but Theo barely had time to rest. Early the next morning, the Queen summoned him to her private chambers. The air was heavy with tension as Theo entered, finding her seated on a throne surrounded by her closest advisors. Vazrek stood at her side, his ever-critical gaze fixed on Theo. "Dr. Caldwell," the Queen began, her voice calm but commanding, "your efforts with Varnix have exceeded my expectations. He is no longer a mere guardian, but a symbol of this kingdom's strength." Theo inclined his head, unsure of where this conversation was heading. "Thank you, Your Majesty. But it's his strength and resilience that made it possible. I just helped him heal." The Queen's lips curved into a faint smile. "Humility suits you, Doctor. However, we face a challenge that will test Varnix and you, beyond anything we have yet encountered." She gestured to Vazrek, who stepped forward, holding a holographic map that flickered to life. The image showed a mountainous region beyond the fortress walls, marked by jagged peaks and glowing fissures. "The rebels have retreated to the Shadow Ravines," Vazrek explained. "It's their stronghold, a natural fortress impossible to breach, unless we use Varnix." Theo frowned, his arms crossing. "You want to send him into that? He's not a war machine." "No," the Queen interjected firmly. "He is our beacon of hope, but this mission is as much about trust as it is about strength. You have built a bond with him, Dr. Caldwell. He will not go alone. You will guide him." Theo's heart sank. Taking Varnix into such hostile territory was a monumental risk. but one look at the dragon, resting just outside the chamber with his glowing yellow eyes watching the room intently, reminded Theo of the trust they had forged. He took a deep breath. "All right," he said, "we'll do it, but on one condition. This mission isn't about destruction. It's about showing the rebels what Varnix really is, a protector." The queen nodded, her expression resolute. "Agreed. The mission begins at dawn." At sunrise, Theo and Varnix stood at the edge of the shadow ravines, the jagged cliffs stretching into the horizon. The air was thick with sulfur, and the distant sound of magma bubbling created an ominous backdrop. Varnix growled low, his spines rattling slightly. Theo placed a hand on the dragon's flank. "This isn't going to be easy, but we've handled worse, right?" Varnix rumbled softly, lowering his massive head until it was level with Theo. The human smiled. "That's what I thought." They descended into the ravines, navigating the treacherous terrain with care. Varnix's wings stretched out for balance, his claws digging into the rocky ground. Theo followed closely, scanning the area with a handheld tracker for signs of rebel activity. It didn't take long to find them. A patrol of armed rebels appeared from behind a ridge, their weapons raised. Theo stepped forward, raising his hands. "We're not here to fight," he called out. "We just want to talk." The rebels hesitated, their gazes darting between Theo and the towering dragon behind him. One of them, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek, sneered. "Talk? With that monster at your side?" Theo stood his ground. "He's not a monster. He's a guardian, a protector. And if you give us a chance, he can be yours too." Before the rebels could respond, an explosion rocked the ground. A fissure opened nearby, spewing molten rock into the air. The rebels panicked, scrambling for cover as the terrain shifted dangerously. Theo turned to Varnix. "We've got to help them." The dragon roared, leaping into action. With astonishing agility, he used his massive body to shield the rebels from falling debris, his wings creating a protective barrier. Theo pulled one rebel from the edge of a collapsing ledge, dragging him to safety. As the chaos subsided, the rebels stared in stunned silence at the dragon who had just saved their lives. Theo approached the leader, his voice firm. "Still think he's a monster?" The journey back to the fortress was surreal. The rebels, once fierce enemies, now followed behind Theo and Varnix in solemn silence. The dragon moved with a calm grace, his massive wings tucked tightly against his body. Every so often he glanced back at the group, as if ensuring their safety. When they arrived at the fortress gates, the queen and her court were waiting. The sight of the rebels caused a ripple of tension among the guards, but Theo stepped forward, raising his hand. "They're here to talk," he announced. "No weapons, no fighting." The queen descended from the steps, her gaze sweeping over the rebels before settling on Varnix. "You've accomplished what no army could," she said to Theo. "You've turned fear into trust." Theo glanced at the dragon beside him, a small smile playing at his lips. He did most of the work. One of the rebels stepped forward, the same scarred leader who had doubted Theo in the ravines. He bowed his head slightly. "We've seen enough. This creature is more than we imagined. He protected us when he didn't have to. That means something." The queen nodded, her expression softening. "Then let this be the start of something new. No more bloodshed, no more fear. Zephyrian will not be ruled by terror but by unity." The rebels agreed, their weapons surrendered as a gesture of goodwill. For the first time in years, the fortress felt at peace. That evening, Theo sat with Varnix in the courtyard, the stars above casting a gentle glow over the dragon's iridescent scales. The beast rested his head on the ground, his breathing steady and calm. "You did good today," Theo said, scratching behind Varnix's horns. "You showed them who you really are." Varnix rumbled softly, nudging Theo's shoulder with his snout. The human chuckled, leaning back against the dragon's warm side. "Guess we make a pretty good team, huh?" As the night deepened, Theo felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Together, he and Varnix had transformed fear into hope, proving that even the fiercest of creatures could be a force for good. It wasn't just a victory for Zephyrian, it was a legacy, one they would build together. The fragile peace between the rebels and the Queen's court did not go unnoticed by the galaxy's many opportunists. Whispers of Varnix's transformation and Theo's role as his handler spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of those who sought to exploit or destroy this newfound unity. It wasn't long before a rogue mercenary faction, hired by unknown forces, launched a full-scale assault on the fortress. Theo was in Varnix's chamber when the first explosion rocked the fortress. Alarms blared, and the walls shook as debris rained down from the ceiling. Varnix growled, his glowing eyes narrowing as he rose to his full height, the dragon's massive frame filling the chamber. Theo grabbed his communicator, his voice cutting through the chaos. "What's going on?" A panicked guard's voice crackled back. "Mercenaries, Doctor, heavily armed, they're targeting the Queen and the dragon." Theo clenched his jaw, his heart pounding. "On our way." He turned to Varnix, placing a hand on the dragon's flank. "They're coming for you, big guy, but we're not going to let them take anything." Varnix roared, the sound shaking the chamber as Theo climbed onto the dragon's back, gripping the reins he had fashioned during their training sessions. Together, they burst through the chamber doors, heading toward the battlefield. The fortress courtyard was a scene of chaos. Mercenaries in sleek, advanced armor moved in formation, their weapons cutting down the Queen's guards with ruthless efficiency. Explosions lit up the night sky, and smoke billowed from the breached gates. Varnix landed in the courtyard with a deafening thud, his wings unfurling as he let out a roar that silenced the battlefield. The mercenaries turned their weapons on him, firing plasma bolts that ricocheted harmlessly off his shimmering scales. "Let's show them what you can do," Theo muttered, guiding Varnix forward. The dragon charged, his claws tearing through the ground as he unleashed a torrent of flame. Mercenaries scattered, their formations breaking as Varnix swept his massive tail through their ranks. Theo provided covering fire from his perch, his shots precise and calculated. As the battle raged on, Theo spotted the Queen, surrounded by her guards and pinned down by enemy fire. "Varnix, to the left," he shouted, directing the dragon toward the embattled royal party. Varnix roared in response, leaping into the fray. He positioned himself between the Queen and the attackers, his wings forming a protective barrier. Plasma bolts bounced off his scales as he unleashed another wave of fire, forcing the mercenaries into retreat. "Your Majesty," Theo called, extending a hand to the Queen. "We need to get you to safety." The Queen nodded, climbing onto Varnix's back with Theo's help. Together, they rode to the top of the fortress, where the Queen's remaining forces were regrouping. From their vantage point, they could see the tide of battle beginning to turn. The mercenaries' ranks thinning under the combined might of Varnix and the Queen's army. By dawn, the battle was over. The mercenaries had been defeated, their leaders captured or fled. The fortress stood battered but unbroken, its defenders victorious. Varnix, exhausted but uninjured, stood in the courtyard surrounded by stunned onlookers. His transformation from feared weapon to revered guardian was now undeniable. Theo dismounted, placing a hand on the dragon's snout. "You did it, big guy. You saved them." Varnix rumbled softly, nudging Theo's chest with his snout. Theo chuckled, scratching behind the dragon's horns. I know. You don't need the praise, but you've earned it." The Queen approached, her ceremonial armor scorched and dented from the battle. She placed a hand on Varnix's flank, her gaze filled with admiration. "Dr. Caldwell, Varnix has proven himself as more than a guardian. He is a symbol of what we can achieve when trust replaces fear." Theo smiled, his exhaustion fading in the face of her words. "He's taught me as much as I've taught him, Your Majesty. Maybe more." The Queen turned to the gathered crowd, her voice ringing out across the courtyard. "Let it be known that Varnix is not merely a protector of Zephyrian, but a part of its future. And Dr. Caldwell, who saw the soul of a guardian in what others called a monster, will continue to guide us." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing off the fortress walls. Theo felt a wave of pride and gratitude, not just for the recognition, but for the bond he had forged with Varnix. A bond that had changed not only their lives, but the course of Zephyrian's history. That night, Theo sat with Varnix in the quiet courtyard, the stars shining brightly above. The dragon rested his head on the ground, his breathing steady as he gazed at Theo with his luminous yellow eyes. "You've come a long way," Theo said softly, running a hand over Varnix's scales. "And so have I." Varnix rumbled in response, his massive tail flicking gently. Theo leaned back against the dragon's side, a sense of peace washing over him. "This isn't the end, you know," Theo murmured. "It's just the beginning." As the stars continued to shine, Theo and Varnick sat together, their bond stronger than ever. Together they had faced fear, doubt, and danger, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their story was no longer one of survival, but of trust, unity, and hope. A legacy for all of Zephyrian to follow.